realistically, is that a beginner's device? Because obviously, if it was 1970, I would probably say, yeah, of course, because there's no alternative. But in a world of Volkers and Rolkers and other things, is it reasonable to assume that the person who's going to be trying to build a workshop, because that's another barrier to entry that will be there unless you intend to be selling these standalone, which I don't know if you are, or, pre-built, is this really for beginners? Or is this really a sort of mid-level thing? And can we therefore assume some knowledge? And if so, what knowledge?
There's a question of what is a beginner today, because in a world with computers, you can have access to any device you want. And something like a Volker, which I have and I enjoy, it's really interesting to compare something like a Volker FM with Dext or whatever you're using, or even Operator in Ableton, as to say which one is simpler, which one is easier to use, which one makes more sense. Why would you have a physical Volker, which is quite difficult to program and requires quite a lot of thinking, or it has simple macro controls as well, but is still a chunk of a sort of barrier compared with a hardware thing? And I think the idea really behind this thing is it's, if somebody's got a big modular synth, then it's hard to see what this gives them, really, I think.
Well, more of the same.
More of the same, exactly. Whereas if somebody is interested in experimenting or interested in doing something different and weird,
okay,
this gets them into that in a way that's much more tangible than doing it with kind of the sort of digital interfaces you might get. So I think that's kind of the idea, is it's a way of sort of getting people into a more experimental kind of mindset.
Yes.
Than they
Weird.
might have otherwise, into the weird.
You
and
said
I
those
think
words specifically, experimental and weird, and not sort of necessarily, oh, I just want an analog synth for.
Well, why would you want an analog synth in 2024?
Because it's cool.
Okay, this is a lot cooler than that.
Yeah, I suppose.
I think that's the point. Is like if you want to make the sound of an analog synth, do it in Ableton. It'll be great. If you want a physical analog synth because you like it and it's sexy and it's interesting, then buy that. But they're not sort of functionally equivalent things. And this is a much more extreme, much more deep, much more interesting version of a kind of simple analog synth. And the thing I keep finding myself, because I've been thinking about this pretty much continuously for about 14 months now. And one of the things I find really interesting is waves of seeing how deep it is. So I'll be like, this is kind of deep, and then this is deeper, and then this is deeper. So the other day, I put up a video about processing a drum machine through the system, like a little 90-second kind of reel. And it said you can put a drum machine in, you can put an 808 in, and you can run it through distortion, and you can run it through a ring mod, and you can run it through a filter. I was like, those things are all true, but any one of those things you could make a half-hour-long video about, you could talk about. I remember Ben Divkid did a brilliant video about distortion Eurorack. It was exactly that. It was like when I did the little mini drive, he was like, these are all the ways you can use distortion. You can use it in feedback loops. You can use it to take one channel of a filter and distort it, the other one, and send it through. Really subtle, really intense, all these different things. You can do all of those things in this system. And I was looking at it just going, it's that kind of openness, I think, is what I found sort of joyful when I got into modular, and doing things that are difficult to do in other ways.
What sort of things? You mean
Well, like
feedback or
feedback, or like, like the other day I did a patch which was running something into a filter and then taking the high pass and distorting that and putting the low pass through a ring modulator. Now you can do that. I'm sure there's ways of patching that up in Ableton or something, but it's instant with this. It's kind of instantly different and weird. And the idea of like patching something up and then moving one patch cable to a different place and the whole thing kind of shifting or breaking. So I think that's kind of the pitch. And I think when I've sat down with musicians and talked about it, they will see the two things that people said to me. One is having it physically in front of them makes it make sense in a way that a kind of, particularly with synths and interfaces on computers, makes a lot less sense. Clearly, you can say having a mini-moog in front of you might make more sense. But the very, very complicated synth interfaces you often get, where you've got multiple kind of pages of different controls, they're like, okay, with this, I turn a knob and something changes. And I don't turn a knob, but it doesn't change. So they've found that kind of, and that's people who are nothing to do with modular at all, but they're like, it's the tangibility. It's like it's in front of you. It's obviously not going to be necessarily immediately intuitive, but there's something about the fact that once you understand its modules and you understand a module's patched into another module, then any control will generally change something quite big and dramatic. And there's not kind of banks of sort of sections. But the other thing that when I talk to musicians and people who do have, modulars, or they're aware of it, or they use it, they look at it and say, it is fun, and it is somebody. I was saying, one of the things I often do is take them out and go and sit in a cafe with somebody and talk it through with them. And somebody was sat there with headphones, just kind of playing with it in a cafe. And they look up and say, this will be brilliant for decoration. And I said, what do you mean decoration? He said, well, you might make a track on Ableton or whatever. You've got the basic structure of the thing happening. He was kind of a dance producer. But then you need something that is distinctive and something that is different, and something that nobody else has.
All the things that the Chemical Brothers used the VCS3 for, basically.
Exactly that. But also all sorts of different things. You might take what you've made and process it through it and do something. It doesn't need to be squiggly VCS3 noises, but it's noises that are different and unexpected. Another guy I was talking to, who was had a background in kind of sort of club production, but now was doing kind of library music and film and stuff. And he talked about when he does film music, him and all the other people he's working with have got all the plugins, they've got all the computers, they make something on Omnisphere and it sounds great. And he said he will go to his agent and he can say, look, I made this thing in Omnisphere, it's great. And the guy will be like, sure, but I've got 20 other people doing the same thing. And he uses synths generally, analog and hardware synths, to be distinctive in that way. And he kind of looked up from this and said, this is just the kind of shortcut to that. So for him, that kind of, he was looking at it as a form of, again, sort of sprinkling something on top or getting different ideas quickly from what he was doing. So it's not like he's going to sit there and make a full soundtrack for a film on it. And similarly, when my friend Daniel came around, this is not using this was a couple of years ago, he was doing sound for that Spider-Man animated films that he did the soundtracks for. And he immediately gravitated to things that were kind of gestural and big and dramatic. So we patched a big feedback patch together, and he just sat there with control going with a time code and doing kind of risers and things like that. And he was like, and he would have been recording that, over months with orchestras and stuff. But for him, that was the thing that was distinctive and different and unexpected.
Okay. My other question was going to be, what do you foresee that what's the other equipment that people who buy this might own? And I mean, I know you could say how long's a piece of string, but again, I'm still just trying to like say, who is gonna be buying this? Because
so the first thing they will have is a laptop with Ableton or Logic on it. Absolutely, 100%. And again, when I talk to people who do music but aren't modular people, the thing that has made sense to them is you take a sound out of the headphone, out of your laptop, and you run it through this, and you're processing it, you're changing it in some way. And so there might be a drum loop, it might be some pad or something, and you're distorting it, or you're filtering it, or you're ring modding it, and then you can record it back in. And also at that point, you connect it up to the MIDI, and you can start sequencing it in time with whatever you're doing. You can start, modifying it that way. So I think for the basic thing that people will have is a laptop. On the retreat in Cornwall, people were using it with like a field recorder. They'd have they'd have one of these things, and they'd have some interesting sounds of whatever, and they take the headphone out from that and run into it and be processing it in that way. So you can definitely I can see people using it that way. Talked to another producer who talked about just using he used a no-coast sequenced off a computer just as a way of getting interesting, weird, unexpected sounding like arpeggios and stuff. Again, it's kind of decoration almost. So it's connecting with what you already have. So I think, and again, in the sort of short answer to what you're saying, I think anything like a Volca or a drum machine or a pocket operator, those sorts of things, I think are really interesting sources into this.
Okay.
And I guess there are, when you get into things like the Turing card where you're sequencing stuff, if you've got like one of those Behringer mini Moogs or something, that could be something sequencing. Yeah, that would be something you're sequencing from this.
Anyway, sorry.
But people who have cheap things,
I realise they haven't, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. I suppose then the question, do you...
You seem very troubled by it.
No, I'm not troubled. I'm just thinking. But this is me just really thinking about it before I just like start filming things, because I will always try and innately find a kind of way of speaking both to try to speak to advanced people and to beginners somehow in the same moment. So what I'm conscious here is the extent to which I do that. And there's no great skin off my teeth to explain what an oscillator is and what the shapes are by showing them on screen or like having a Modax data and because, as you said, you were like, I want to reach people outside of this show. And really that is... I don't know. I suppose that is everyone with a laptop. It's someone who hasn't necessarily owned a piece of analog hardware before. But there is this other weird barrier with this product that you have to build it, which I think is such a space cadet sort of.
I understand that, and I think clearly long term that is something that I want to work out how to solve that problem. But equally, if somebody comes to a workshop for a day and builds one of these and spends an afternoon doing things with it, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's another really interesting thing that I've found while talking to people, and while we're talking to the people who have them, is the idea of sort of simplicity and of feeling empowered to do things that are weirder. So in terms of the simplicity, I've had people who sort of like the people from the retreat, there's kind of 15 people who've had these for 6 months now. And when I talk to them, they will say things like, I'll be like, how are you getting on? What have you been doing with it? And they'll say, I've only been doing very simple things. And one of the examples of a very simple thing that somebody gave me was, this is a guy doing an MA in composition. They'd composed a piece of music for 2 ensembles and modular synth. And I don't know what they're doing with the modular synth. I don't imagine they're doing anything especially deep and complicated. Maybe they're ring modulating the 2 ensembles against each other, or filtering one or something, or producing some sine waves that they're playing against. But he was like, oh, I've only been doing very simple things with it. And I'm like, you don't need to do complicated things with it. You know, just put down 2 sines playing an interval and play against it. You know, that's fine. That's a perfectly good, interesting thing to do. And that's where the kind of exercises that we did at the retreat, the very first exercise of literally plug in your sine wave into the output and make something with that. And I think that exercise, and I was talking to somebody I've just given one to last week, and he was like, I would never have done that if you hadn't. And he's the guy super experienced in all kinds of electronic music. And he was like, I would never have done that thing of sitting there going, what can I make with a sine wave for half an hour? And I think that notion of there isn't a right way to do this. It doesn't need to be some complicated thing with like 15 tracks. It doesn't need to be like in the video I made showing MIDI, I had like 2 channels of audio coming off the computer, 2 channels of sequencers running off the machine. But you don't need to do that. You don't need to make something that sounds like a whole track with it. So I think that notion of it's to some extent an instrument that you can make sort of single sounds with, the way instruments generally make single sounds, or it might be a kind of hub, like a kind of, it's like a weird mixer. It's that kind of, it does it, but it probably isn't an entire all-in-one recording studio where you're going to press play and you're going to get a song out the end of it.
No. Okay. What and
I think it's really interesting when you talk about, like, shapes is a really interesting part of it, because shapes is basically a maths. I mean, it's this sort of it's
slopes.
Slopes, yeah. Sorry, slopes is, and how you explain that to somebody, I think, is difficult. It's like, how do you explain
that? Slew generator. Or slew? Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's a VC slew, so you can do nice. I did a video the other day that was kind of 303 slides on it.
Yeah.
And that was VC slew on it.
Does that mean it's a filter as well?
It does, but it doesn't go very high. So it filters from kind of about 400 hertz to off.
It's a multi-band filter.
It's a very, very slow, very, very, very low filter. So yes, you could do it. It's certainly an oscillator, well, 2 oscillators. But that's where you get into kind of, you do get into that kind of, well, what's a way of explaining this to people so they feel they can play with it, rather than feeling like they understand it.
Yeah, I'd sort of like, part of me has been thinking I would potentially have lots of example patches to try. So here's patch to try is, you could try this. Let's make a big Doom drone oscillator with 4 oscillators all going at once, and we'll sample that and we'll make a patch out of it, or pad out of it, or a, something in Ableton. We won't use it to make the whole piece of music. We will just make a big noise all at once. And that's one thing you can try, and you can try different tunings to make rave chords.
Yeah.
Or, one example is, here's a sine wave and a looper, and your exercise. So I suppose really nice, the word is exercises, is like things that you will, so that you watch it and you're like, oh, well, these are ways I can use it. And these are also things I will actually potentially try.
Yeah.
So, I suppose that's why also I would like to have your notes, so that, and also from the
I've shared that document with you.
Cool.
There wasn't many notes from the retreat, but I can send you, there's the albums we made that kind of explains a bit of it.
what is the contact mic good for?
So the contact mic is exactly what it is in what am I thinking of? In microphony. So you might you can do things like having it running into a filter that's close to resonance and start exciting that filter with it by banging the case, touching the case. There's a really nice simple patch I did, which was you take the contact mic into the reverb, and then you take a couple of channels of the voltages, the kind of push button thing, into the reverb control voltages. And then as you bash the buttons, the contact mic picks it up. So you get a kind of thud comes out of the reverb. But the different buttons have different lengths of reverb on it. So one will give you a massive, long, slow reverb. One gives you a little tiny, short one. And it's this kind of percussive thing like that.
That's clever, yes, because you're actually twatting the panel as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Can it actually pick up your voice? Can you sing? No, it's not that.
I mean, you obviously...
Can you press it against your face and hum into it? Will it pick that up?
It might do, but it's fundamentally... It's a contact mic, so it's... I mean, you could probably... I've never tried this. It's the sort of thing... Leafcutter John did an absolutely brilliant video of this. You could probably take a pen, put it on your voice box there, and touch the panel like that. That might pick it up. But you can also just...
Good enough for Beethoven, it's good enough for me.
You can also just plug in a... I've got a SM58 with a quarter inch, an inch
an appropriate cable to...
Yeah, and that then is amazing for into the ring mod. I mean, the ring mod on your voice is absolutely extraordinary.
Yes, there is certainly a precedent in...
Yeah, although one thing to say, it doesn't work very well with the square wave, which is what you need for the proper Dalek voice.
Is it? Why do you mean it doesn't work for the square wave?
Because the way the ring mod works, I think, is it's like the signal goes up, and then when the signal goes negative, it also amplifies. So if you put a square wave in, it's like on.
And still on.
And then on, and it just kind of clicks. Okay. So you'd have to use it off like a clock from the computer or something to get a square wavy pulse. Or you can use it as a VCA with the slopes. Works quite well.
What are the common misunderstandings that people have when you show this to people?
Common misunderstandings.
Is there anything where you find yourself having to explain it multiple times? I have one.
What do you have?
It's not clear to me what are ins and outs because of your arrows up, down, which is which. That is not obvious.
To me, up is pushing in and down is pulling out. And also they're white. The outputs are marked with white on all of them. Same as on lots of panels.
Where's the outs are white. The ins are...
Yeah. So if you look at the oscillator, you've got white circles on all the outputs and kind of black circles on all the inputs. And they're always left to right as well. I'm trying to think of any other questions that... I mean, it's been interesting.
I've got some terrible news for you.
What's that?
Did you notice that what's going on here? Your Lofi arrow is the wrong way around. Look at the arrow underneath the word Lofi.
Yes, you're correct.
These are the sweet little inconsistencies that really add charm to it, V1 of an instrument. But, anyway. But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And also, I do know what you mean.
I mean, what's been funny as well has actually been seeing people, when you have people who are used to modular, again, I have these kind of cafe meetings. You'll sit down and somebody will just start on it, and I'll be leaning over and going, oh, and they just got it. They've just like they understand. If you're confident with this stuff, it's just a modular synthesizer.
Yeah.
You
but
know,
it's still, I suppose there's like the ins and outs are not a language that has been universally agreed upon. And, you know, if you're make noise, you put square coloured in square blocks around the actual sockets themselves. And if you don't you just label them. And but yeah, that the up down thing doesn't always mean this. It wasn't clear to me, is the point. I sort of got it. And then just because of the sort of arrangement, all these modules that are squeezed and hemmed and hawed into different positions, then, for example, you know, some of them are there to the side, some of them are above, some of them are below. You know, it's kind of, it isn't actually, I would say, immediately clear to me. And obviously in the amplifier section, the language is completely inverted. The amplifier section's its own little world. But that's why I just wanted to be sure. And it's something I will explain in the video because I don't think it is clear. Is there? Yeah.
I suppose the thing that often the conversations when you talk to people become about the computer quite quickly.
Yes. That's what what kind of questions do they ask?
You're just saying they will look at the panel and then they will look at these things. Got them in another envelope for some reason. And you will say, what's that for? And I will say, well, you can use it for MIDI. And they go, okay, I understand. And then you say, or you can use it for a reverb. And they're like, what? And you say, yeah, if you put the reverb in and you press reset, then the audio input and the audio output becomes a stereo reverb. And they're like, oh, okay. And I think that notion of something that is kind of fluid in that way, they're generally then immediately quite interested and curious about that notion. And I think that idea of the kind of openness of that, and the thing I would worry about people thinking about is, oh, I'm supposed to program this myself, which you're absolutely not. You know, I think a tiny proportion of people will ever try and program it. But there are people out there who know how to program, who are making interesting things for it. And I think that notion of the computer being a place where you can try really, you know, there are some things that are useful and straightforward, like it's a reverb, but there are things where it's like this can speak like a speak and spell.
Well, tell me about your success with a certain legendary piece of firmware on the computer.
Oh, with the Turing machine? Or
not that. I was thinking more that clip that you sent me yesterday or the day before.
Which one's that?
It's
the braids. Yeah. So, and this isn't with me. So there's a community of people writing this stuff, and we're kind of, as a community, getting better at building the tools that you need to build stuff. So when it started, it was 6 months ago or so. People started writing code for it. It was very kind of raw, and we were working out how to do things. And there's been kind of optimization of that computer bit to make it sound better, to make it less noisy, and to make it work better. But now the sort of tools are beginning to kind of fall into place. People can say, oh, I'll pick up the firmware for mutable instruments, braids, and port that into this. And somebody did that, and that exists, and it sounds fantastic, as braids always sounds fantastic. And there's a kind of piece of work and development to be done on that to say, what's the right interface for this? What's the right way of using it with the rest of the system that makes sense? And and that's for me is a really interesting part of that process of saying. So a good example of that would be the reverb card, where when Chris kind of ported this kind of open source reverb algorithm across to the card, and immediately you were like, oh, that sounds fantastic. That's really good. He then says, what am I going to do with these other outputs? What am I going to do with the voltage outputs and the voltage inputs? And I'm like, well, we definitely want some CV into it to control things like the length and the kind of tilt and stuff. But I was like, what you actually need probably is a sequencer, because you always want a sequencer in this thing. And if you haven't got a sequencer and you've got some spare outputs, you should probably do that. And he has built this incredibly deep card now, which has this nice, beautiful reverb, has some sensible CV inputs into it. Then you plug it into USB, you can set a whole load of kind of pulses, triggers, sequencers. It's got a MIDI interface in it. It's got a Turing machine in it. And so those two CV outputs on the right and the pulse outputs below them are controlled by, however you set that up, how you configure it.
I should just at this moment, I've realised that I think what throws me about the arrows is that I definitely do feel that they should be the other way around, in my opinion, because inputs come into me, outputs go out to the world. So into me. So the arrows are pointing at me to say into my system, outputs go out. They go out. They go away from me. They go out. So I sort of, that's what threw me. That's what's thrown me about this is that's it, is because I literally would expect them to be inverted. Like up should mean outwards, down should mean inwards. To me, that's what thrown me. It didn't.
I don't know. I mean, nobody else has found it.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. Difficult. I'm weird.
And I think you've got the left and right, and you've got the white on the outputs.
If it's any consolation, I received a Dreadbox synthesizer the other day who's like the nomenclature on one of the two switches confused me so much that I've put tape over it and tried to design my own improvement on their legending because I found it so confusing. So,
I mean, it's funny for me using it. The one thing, it is super dense, obviously. I occasionally find I will expect, not rationally, but I'll just put it in the wrong socket, the CV inputs into slopes. I will think, oh, this is an output for some reason. Just kind of reaching for the wrong place. But I guess that will, but I mean, essentially also it's all left to right. So the inputs are on the left, the outputs are on the right.
I suppose we can make a case that if people have worked maths out, then anything's possible in the world.
Yeah. Maths is probably the biggest selling module that's ever been designed. So
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't seem that much of a challenge.
Okay. So I suppose, computer, speaking of computer, is just like, I can't remember if I've asked you this, but I suppose what is in layman's terms, help me understand the limit of what computer will be capable of ever, So
I would say the limit will be you won't be able to run VSTs on it. You won't be able to do long, like looper style delays. You won't be able to do a delay for a minute. You probably can't do a delay for 30 seconds. Probably can't do a delay for 10 seconds. You can do...
What probably could you do a delay for, though?
Second or two, probably.
Is there a delay?
We haven't made one yet. Nobody's made one yet.
There needs to be a delay, I think.
Yeah, there will be a delay.
Yeah.
I think the other really interesting thing, one of the things I'm thinking about a lot with computer, because I don't know how computers are going to evolve at all. I don't know what people are going to find exciting, what people are going to
give away or charge for, or
all that stuff. And I think one of the things I think at the moment I'll do is have kind of bundles of cards every so often. So you might say in I don't know, February or March next year or something, when a bunch of people have got these out in the world, you say, okay, here is bundle 2.
A drop is what they call them. Kids call them drops.
Exactly, it's that sort of thing. But it's particularly because it's a group. So the first, it comes with reverb, Turing, MIDI, and a blank card for you to do whatever you want with.
Okay.
That's the only ones. And then there is also the 8MU card that connects it up to the 8MU and does not quite sure. I guess we'll probably sell those. But then I could imagine in a couple of months saying, right, here is, maybe somebody does a delay. Maybe somebody does an absolutely beautiful vocoder. Maybe somebody does a thing like braids, but with different sounds on it. Maybe somebody does an absolutely bonkers speech synthesizer. Maybe somebody does a brilliant kind of algorithmic kind of byte beat kind of thing. And that idea of a bundle with like something really essential, like a kind of reverb, even something kind of boring, like a proper MIDI host might be a thing that's useful. So you could plug in any types of keyboards.
You would sell a bundle of cards, basically.
So I think, yeah, you'd have a kind of official bundle. And I don't know what that'll cost, whether that might be 30, 40 quid, something like that, maybe. But then individuals might want to sell cards themselves. They might want to,
sell the firmware on, like, on not Gumtree,
Gumroad, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
or they might want to just give it away and publish it. You might have a thing of like, I was wondering about a thing of like work in progress. So you've got work in progress code that you can try. Like that speech synthesis thing, literally you immediately look at it and go, this needs a whole bunch more controls and there's much more interesting things you can do with it. But it's really awesome when you plug it in and it just starts bubbling numbers. Yeah. So you might say, okay, here's a work in progress speech synthesizer. You can download it. You can put it on your card. And then maybe a few months after that, we're like, okay, this is now finished. We're going to put this in a bundle
from a sort of retail perspective, like, it feels to me like, why would you not want to buy, like, if someone said to me, if it was 50 quid and you get like 5 or 6 different cards to try, that just seems like a bit of a no-brainer. Like
that's the way I would think, but I think with all of this, it's really like, it's working out what works for the people using them and what works for the developers developing it. But for me, it's just been so exciting seeing that happen. There's about maybe 15, 20 people who've got the kind of dev cards. And then there's a real handful of people who've got the full kits. Because I think that's the other really interesting thing is if you're developing it by yourself in a kind of Eurorack system, it's slightly different from developing it in the actual...
You've just made them modules of the computer.
A bunch of people just have the computer as a module,
Snapped off in. When is the module coming?
As a thing that people can buy, I don't know. I mean, obviously obviously that feels like something we will do.
There is a crack of daylight between all the way down the computer. This is a module.
It totally is a thing that can be done, and I'm sure.
I suppose you might as well get this done and then get some stuff out there for the computer, and then it becomes.
But I think it is really interesting that like what works in this context. Like you'd never make a reverb with a sequencer in it in Eurorack. It would be bonkers. You never would. I mean, why would you? Whereas in this, it makes perfect sense. You're like, I'd much rather have, if you've got 2 spare CVs, put a MIDI controller in your reverb.
Yeah. Or like a complete simulated 101 and just give me the whole thing and a sequencer.
Yeah, exactly.
Instant square pusher. Okay, so...
But then actually that's an interesting one because then because people have been like, I can make a whole voice. Clearly you can make a whole voice in this computer. You're like, why would you do that when you've got really nice analog oscillators analog filters next to it? You wouldn't you might put some very interesting quirky digital filter into it, but you thinking of like, and that's what's really nice when you've got something like braids in there and straight next to it, you've got really nice filters. So it kind of makes an immediate sense.
I mean, like the obvious, if anyone asked me, like, I've got an analog synth semi-modular, what's the first thing I should add to it? I would be my first thing is, well, either a Turing machine or you should add a digital oscillator like a Braids or a Platts.
Exactly.
Those are just the two obvious to me, or obviously another envelope and stuff. I do see this as being quite a good sidecar to other semi-modular synths. In fact, fuck, it totally is that. Excuse me while I'm making it. It's just so fucking obvious. But it just needs to be said, and it can be. I can show that. I could, be like, here's a mini brute or micro brute or something, and
or some high quality Behringer gear, maybe.
Yes, I'll buy in some Behringer.
Well, as you saw, I did actually buy some Behringer.
Did you? How was that?
Well, at Bristronica, I was chatting to Bruce, who was one of the people who was at the retreat. I think as Surgeon was playing, and he was leaning into my ear, and he was like, "Got to make a like a sequencer that does acid house, like a 303 sequencer." And as he was talking, I was like, "What would it be like if you had an acid Turing?" So Turing machine like randomization method, but doing slides and long gates and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's basically what I did, because the Turing machine card has like 2 pitch outs and 2 voltage outs, and it also has you can give it different sort of step lengths, not step lengths, like gate pulse lengths, that kind of thing. And so, but anyway, as he said that, I was like, I don't really understand what a 303 sequencer is. I've never really used one much. So I did go and spend, I think, £60 on Gumtree.
Oh yeah, buy
a second-hand Behringer one.
I bought it second-hand.
And I was like, okay, now I can kind of understand it. But sequencing this from that was quite fun, because it does sequence out, it does send out the glides.
And it suddenly sounds 303-ish.
And suddenly it does. But it's funny because it doesn't, it was really interesting to do, because it doesn't sound obviously at all 303-ish. These oscillators are not at all like 303 oscillators, and the filters are not even the slightest bit like 303 oscillators.
Hang on, did you say the Turing machine has got like an acid Turing?
No, I haven't actually built the entire thing. I haven't built the glider.
When you said that, is like, dual channel Turing machine with like counterpoint built into it would be interesting.
So what you've got in the one that I've actually just emailed you this morning, the card, you've got 2 quantized outputs. You've got the ability for one of those sort of 2 channels to be 1 step longer, so they can kind of go in and out of phase a bit.
I'm just trying to. I've seen, like, you've sent me a thing that's got Turing machine configuration as well.
Yeah, actually, I'll send you the link. Hold on. Because you can see it on the screen. You can see what I'm on about. Where's it gone? Okay, here it is. Obviously, it's be a lot easier when it's all linked up. Can I send you a message? Is there a chat there?
Yeah, there is a chat. If you go to click chat and go to everyone.
Yeah, if you click on that, you can just see the incredibly basic config page, which I will tweak a bit, but is basically all there. So you've got, the way it works, it uses that little switch.
So there's basically underneath the computer knob is a little switch.
Yeah.
So you plug in your Turing card, plug in the USB, and then push the switch.
No, you don't need any of that. You just, when you've got the card in there, you just connect it to your browser and you go to that site. You don't need to press any switches. The switch is only for updating the firmware.
Okay. So you plug a USB into the thing and then...
You go to that website and then...
Do you need to connect the workshop to power? Or is there enough power through USB to talk to the little card?
You could do that. The LEDs won't work, so it's a bit confusing.
Right. But technically it will still speak to it. But
yes,
because that is an inconvenience having to like power this poor... Anyway.
But so you can then see on that page all of the options you have.
Okay.
So you've got scales, notes within that scale, octave ranges, and then the pulse out lengths, and those ones with the arrows left and right are they are Turingified lengths of pulses, basically.
And then by the way, can you completely reflash the Turing card to turn it into something else?
Yes, that is actually a kind of a weakness of the whole system. Is the cards? Well, it's not a weakness. The cards are completely universal, and they're completely unprotected in any way. So you can just plug in your Turing card and turn it into a reverb or turn it into anything else.
Yeah.
Which I definitely think people will do by mistake as well. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to update the firmware on my reverb, and they've got the Turing card in, and then they've suddenly got two.
You did say that this was an experimental device.
That I think is going to be, that is definitely, but I think the only real downside is it means we'll have to be pretty open with all the firmware.
Are you saying that the firmware isn't protected in any way?
No.
Yeah,
so if you're
Sean Costello, you're probably not going to develop a banging reverb for this.
No, you wouldn't do. And if somebody doesn't want to buy the cards, they'll probably be able to find the firmware.
Home taping is killing.
So
computers.
It's very much it will be very much home taping friendly, I think. And what I've found myself is that actually it's just really nice having a card with the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would want the thing. That's when we say with the bundle, it's about just
exactly
give me the thing that's just done.
And having loads, I've literally got a whole pile here of blank ones that have all got little numbers written on them. And it's fine for when you're developing it, but that is slightly irritating. It's quite nice having the sort of.
Is there a sort of space to write on the blank ones?
There is, yeah. They've got a little 7-segment display on them, so they've got little like that one there, and you can fill in the numbers, so you can have a number on it.
A number? Oh, you can like.
So that one says like ND, and I can't remember what that was supposed to be when I programmed it.
Oh, I see.
There's a problem.
So you've got two characters basically.
Exactly.
It's similar to Roland stuff in the 90s.
Exactly. I mean, it's quite hard to see how else you write on them because they are quite small.
Well, you can get like really fine, permanent markers like CDR pens and stuff are quite good to have around for this sort of.
So you've now moved it forward to the 90s with a CDR pen.
Yes, indeed. What did the tuning range end up being?
The what?
The tuning range of the sine square oscillators.
It's probably about 4 or 5 octaves. I mean, it's kind of...
Probably.
The thing with calibration is if you want to spend ages and ages and ages tweaking it, you can probably get it higher.
Mm.
But if you want it to be... Because actually, I'll explain something about calibration. So if you don't use it with any other equipment, with CV, you would build it and then you just calibrate the computer to the oscillators. So you never need to piss about with the oscillators with the little trimmers. You leave the oscillator as it comes and you calibrate the computer so it sends out the voltages that are right for the oscillator.
But then if you wanted to use like a key step or something.
If you want to use a key step, you would calibrate the oscillators to the key step, and then you would calibrate the computer to the oscillator.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you happen to have like a big voltmeter, you could calibrate the computer to the voltmeter, but most people don't have that.
Are you going to write out these procedures?
No, people just work it out.
Cool. Jesus.
I will make a video. And actually, the computer calibration is very straightforward now, and will get more straightforward because it'll be able to do it automatically. Because the only thing you need is pitch. So you just use a tuner.
Okay.
So you would if you're calibrating the oscillators, it is fiddly because it's an analog oscillator. So you're having to set it, then play an octave, then turn the little tune like one turn to the right, then go back, tune it again, play another oscillator. You have to go through that. And again, you can go through that as many times as you want to get it as accurate as you want to get it. And then, but if you don't have to do that, tuning just the computer is quite straightforward.
I've heard people on the internet are foaming at the mouth that there's no VCA on your synthesizer.
Well, there is.
So it's the ring mod.
The ring mod does work as VCA.
And it is there is no limit or like concern or ever that if you send a slopes into the, I mean, I'm saying this slightly, controversially because I've tried it and it does work, but just there isn't anything like any concern or it does work, right?
The VCA?
Yeah,
it does. I mean,
absolutely.
I basically never use VCAs for anything much. I only use them for kind of modulation sometimes. But if you want, for example, if you want to have,
you definitely want, because in a live situation, if you were using this to make a bass line as your band on stage, then you don't want this to be kicking out like 30 hertz just all the time because you've not fully gated the thing. So it is.
Then you could use the ring mod for that.
Yeah. And the top on the ring mod, the top socket is CV. Is it?
No, it's the bottom socket. The top one is kind of the top one is carrier. The bottom one is modulator.
I suppose from the perspective of ring mod also being a VCA, it feels like it could do with like some gold lettering somewhere just to tell you which one is supposed to be the audio. What is it? Are they the same or what?
I mean, it's a balanced modulator, so I think it's that way around.
Okay. The filter's provenance.
Yeah.
It's the humpback filter. Is it an Oberheim filter?
It is definitely evolved from an Oberheim 7 filter. So I think one of the things to say with both the filters and the oscillators is they really are like early mid-70s style filter and oscillator. They're kind of before the era of chip filters and oscillators. So they're made from like op amps and transistors and these things called OTAs, which are another type of op amp, basically. And it's kind of from that era, whereas by the sort of late 70s, when you had kind of Prophet 5, Prophet 5 was possible because you had those chip oscillators and chip filters appeared. And these are both from kind of an earlier era.
And in practice, that means that they're slightly unstable, slightly.
I think or just certainly
or better or worse.
Well, I think to me the oscillators sound really good, particularly in the way they respond to FM. I don't know if I can quantify why they sound better, but I mean I've got chip oscillators that to me don't feel like they sound as nice. I have no idea what that specifically means, but kind of the sign for me, the thing I really, really liked about them is that sine wave with FM.
Yeah.
It just feels like a very kind of.
It does have a.
It's kind of bright, and it always sounds good to me. Whereas when I've used the more, I haven't heard that particular sound as well from those kind of chip oscillator things. I'm sure there are plenty of brilliant sounds but I mean the other implication of that is you're not going to immediately plug it in and get 9 octaves of perfect tuning from it, which you get from a chip oscillator.
Can you explain the voltages properly?
Yeah, so the voltages, if you turn it on and press the button, when you turn it on, all 4 go on. That's just kind of glitch in the circuit. It's a bit like a Turing machine, all lit up. Turn it on, you press a button, you will have 4 different voltages coming out from the 4 voltage outputs. One of them might be -1, one of them might be +2, one of them might be +0.5, one of them might be -0.3. If you press another button, you get a different set of 4 voltages will come out. They will be different. That's all you can
All
really
of
say
them,
about them.
not just
They will all be
one.
different. Some will go up, some will go down, but they will all be a different set of voltages. If you press another button, you'll get another set of voltages. Some will go up, some will go down. If you go back to the first button, the voltages will all go back to where they were. So it's not randomizing. It's just it's 4 different sets of voltages. And then if you turn the knob, all the voltages change again, and kind of all the voltages underneath all the buttons change.
Randomly.
I mean, it's not random. There is no kind of noise generator. There's no randomness in it. I would say very unpredictably. So actually, one of the things you notice as you use it is that some of the outputs have wider ranges than other outputs. Some of the buttons typically make lots of the outputs go down or lots of the outputs go up. And you kind of learn that, and as you play with it, you'll be like, oh, I think if I want a big change, maybe I'll use one of the top buttons, one of the top outputs. But it's unpredictable.
If you push the same button repeatedly, do the voltages keep changing?
No.
They'll just stay at the...
No.
And why does the knob have a bidirectional arrow on it?
Because it's not really it's not a scale. It's not like a low to high. As I said, some will go up and some will go down. The other thing to say is also it's polyphonic. So if you hold down 2, you'll get another set of voltages. Hold down 4, you'll get a different set of voltages.
Yeah.
So what that means, you can hold down one button and kind of trill the other 3, and the voltages will kind of trill up and down.
Okay.
And one of the ways to think about using that.
Can I, just before I forget, this is a
Yeah.
really important question, but if for example, I turn this on,
Yeah.
and then turn it off and turn it back on again, are the same voltages
Yes.
going to be appearing? And if I turn the knob completely anti-clockwise or counterclockwise, will I always, forever until the end of time, get the same voltages?
Yes.
So in a sense, then like all the voltages are preset. You're just kind of
Exactly that. That's what I mean. There's no randomness. Any differences between 2 units will just be kind of manufacturing differences in terms of resistors and stuff. Another way to look at it as well, you can just say, I'm going to press one button, take one voltage out, and then you can use that knob just as a straightforward offset.
Yeah.
And what I was going to say, another way of kind of using it is...
I'm really sorry to interrupt you again. What is actually happening when you turn that knob?
Okay.
What are you actually doing to
I'll tell you what you've got is you have a resistor ladder. So you've got a resistor ladder where at the top you might have, for example, you might have like plus 12 volts at the top and minus 12 volts at the bottom. So you imagine you've got a bunch of resistors. At the points between those resistors, you've got a set of voltages.
Right.
Then the buttons inject 12 volts into different points in that resistor ladder. So when one button is pressed, there's 12 volts at this point. When another button's pressed, there's volts at another point. If you've got 2 held down, it's injecting voltages at 2 points. Then the knob is injecting 2 more voltages into it. And then the outputs are tapping off 4 different points in the resistor ladder and buffering them and sending them out.
Okay. I kind of understand that. I mean, it's sort of
it's not
standing principle, but
yeah, it's you imagine basically.
I suppose what I'm getting at here is that there isn't just like a random number generator that's
that's my point. There is no randomness.
It's
like a fixed matrix.
Yeah.
And then the buttons pump in voltages, the knob pumps in voltages, and the outputs are 4 points in that matrix taken out.
Your knob punches and pumps and voltages. So, okay, I think that is quite helpful, and I definitely understand that a bit better than the main point. Is it's not random. The knob controls like an additional voltages, which just offset everything in different ways.
Yeah, it's exactly it offsets.
Kind of
and the way
rely
it
on
offsets, some will go up and some will go down. Yeah,
and if you power cycle it, it will be the same, and that's
it's
really
exactly
important.
The same. There's no. So a interesting thing with that, I sat down with Gareth Jones and was talking him through it, and he was like, "This would be absolutely brilliant if I could use these buttons to play harmonic modes, like a Dorian mode and a whatever." And I did spend a significant amount of time trying to work out if there was a way of doing that.
So in knob position
in analog world, and there wasn't. I gave up because there's no computer to the right of computer. The rest from the right of that, it's
free idea is you could easily make it. You could have a module that was just like 4 HP that had like 8 buttons and different different voltages would.
Yeah, I wanted to do one with 4 computer keys. Big clacky computer keys like and a big chunky knob, exactly, and a big knob from control. And I was thinking of exactly that. Yeah. But then you get into programming.
What do you have any particularly recommended pedal pairings for the Stompbox section, other than a delay? Obviously,
obviously a delay works well, although a delay also works well at the end. I think for the kind of feedback, I was doing the other day with a graphic EQ pedal, which is bonkers because if you turn the feedback up, the whole thing starts to kind of distort and oscillate. And then as you move the sliders up and down, it becomes this kind of really intense, curious kind of distortion thing.
I don't have a graphic EQ pedal. I've got your graphic EQ module, but not that.
What pedals do you have?
A bunch of stuff. I've got a Centaur clone. I've got which is good for driving distortion. I've got a Boss ODB3, which I was playing with last night with the 303 in the T8.
Yeah.
Turns it and you put a pedal drum machine through that. It literally becomes like a proper techno record from the 90s.
Yeah.
And I've got I've got a lot of delays and reverbs and some granular stuff.
So, and I think so. I'd say delays definitely. I think reverb's always nice with feedback in it. So the idea of putting a reverb through it and then
is the feedback is just literally patching the output back into the input. Yeah, by a degree.
It's exactly that, and it's an attenuverter. So in the middle is off, and then left and right. So you can do phase because if it doesn't work one way, try it the other way.
Yeah. Okay.
And obviously it's blend, so you want, if you can take the dry signal out of in the pedal.
Have it totally wet.
If your pedal can do that, then the blend will work as the blend for that. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
And I think again with that, it's where you're thinking like,
fuck, I've got the
what if I
Eventide as well? Shit. Yeah. I've got that Eventide H90 that is like
everything. Yeah.
Everything. And I've also, to be fair, I mean, just thinking it might have a graphic EQ in it. I've got
that wouldn't be so much fun. It's the kind of analog simple. But I think the other thing with this is thinking about like just taking the high pass and putting a delay on it. It's that sort of thing where you're like, when does it make sense to have the pedal actually patched into the patch rather than just putting on the end? Because like I've got an H9 and I remember the moment when I ran this through the H9 reverb and I was like, oh yes, that's why you always have reverb on modular synths and everything. And suddenly it sounded just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
But there'd be no particular need to run the whole thing, through the pedal interface for that.
It feels more like you have a Stompbox interface inside the synth's architecture to basically inject and make them intrinsic components of the sound from the pedal, not adding it.
Yeah,
same as the Cascadia, which has got the same thing where it can be injected at different parts of the process.
And like, yeah, what happens if you put it on just part of the filter output, or if you put it on, yeah, you're just patching it into it. I think that's where that makes more sense than it would otherwise.
Power supplies, I seem to have trouble getting it to run off the USB like quite well. As in, it's just the amount of power delivery and sort of, I don't know. I haven't really, that's a bit unscientific and unhelpful. You're not shipping this with a power supply, are you? People have to.
No, but I haven't found any power delivery. So there's basically power delivery is a very complicated kind of mess at the moment. But there are essentially two types of power delivery. One type that does laptops, and are usually like 40 watts and above. And if it can charge a laptop, it will almost certainly put out 15 volts, which is what this takes. If it only charges a phone, then it probably puts out 5 volts and 9 volts, which means it won't work on this. So for me, like, we've bought dozens of different power supplies off Amazon for like 10, 15 quid. And if the specifications say this puts out 15 volts, it works on this. And I just use it normally on a MacBook charger. Works perfectly. Works on, again, batteries. If you've got a battery that puts out, if you've got a battery that can charge a laptop, then it'll probably charge this, run this. If it only charges a phone, it won't.
I mean, you do say pedal power out on this, and system power in. I want to tell you about that time that I blew up the power supply to my modular synth on stage at Bristronica before I performed, because I plugged the input to my modular synth into the 9-volt pedal output that was on that power supply. And I suddenly realized that you have the same configuration where you have a 9-volt output, and it looks like it's the same size physically as the system power in. So it's just that potential risk. I mean, you would hope that no one would get that wrong.
So the system,
it does say out, but it doesn't have any, like,
has power protection on it.
Oh, does it?
The power in
great
has power protection on it. The pedal power out there is basically a independent little bit of circuit, just pulling power from the USB or pulling power from the 20 volts in. So
the point is, if you injected 15 volts into it, it has a diode that says no and doesn't.
I don't know there's not a diode in on the pedal power input. There is on the main power input to make sure you don't put it in with center negative.
Right.
I haven't tried blowing up the 9-volt input.
Might be worth an attempt to blow it up, only because I did blow up my thing by plugging it in, and it's too late now to do anything about it, but it's just, to be fair, these are in different physical positions on the thing. It does say pedal power out. You can see that, but all I'll tell you is that type of input made me kill my power supply once because I wasn't paying attention. I plugged it into the wrong socket. Okay. But the point I was just going to check is you're not actually giving people a power supply with this. So I think it is a bit of a.
So if I
was Thonk, I'd want to just recommend this. Just
no, we're
like
completely doing that. We've got
like
really
quid or something.
Yeah, we've got really clear recommendations, Amazon links, and making. I think that's the thing which, at the moment, Steve is most concerned about, is somebody buying it, not realizing they need a power supply, making it, and then being disappointed because they.
That's literally would be a thing.
And so I'm today writing the build document, and the first instruction on the build document is make sure you've got a power supply.
Make sure you got a power.
The other thing is patch cables as well. So it will come with the patch cables for the stomp box. It comes with the weird ones.
Oh, yeah,
and then you can
ones.
buy the a set of patch cables as well, because I mean it does eat patch cables as well.
Doesn't
So
it?
I've noticed that you do, like, I think the starter pack has got 10, and 10 will obviously get you going, but then you're like, oh, I'll put the reverb in, and suddenly you've lost 4.
Yeah.
So you do end up using a lot.
You kind of, or in a way, you need to. Yeah, I know this is like us saying how long is a piece of string, but you should probably recommend to people how many patch cables.
We've said that. We've said exactly that. We've said
you
we've
want to
said
have this many to have a good time.
you said you're going to need 10 to get started. And also, I mean, one of the other things is clearly there are uses for a mult or stackables as well.
Cables.
We were thinking of doing whether we get those funny star things that people have, because that's probably the cheapest way of doing
the AliExpress special.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Because and the other thing to say is the outputs all have resistors on them, so you can mix by stacking stuff. So you could stack 2 oscillators into one filter, and they will just mix.
Really?
Quite happily.
Yeah. Happily.
Yeah.
So you can be a bit Buchler about it and just shove things.
Well,
in.
it's more surgy. You can be you can definitely do that.
You can do it both as well. I was told. You can.
So one of the things I did the other day was create a random patch generator. So I wrote a Python script to create sort of plausible patches.
Oh yeah.
So it basically produces patches where every module is patched to a module that is patched to the output, basically.
Yeah.
So if you always just do random connections, you just get a load of random chaos. Because next year I want to publish a book called, 1 million patches for the workshop
We'll
system.
have 1 million patches.
But what's really interesting when you look at them is how weird those patches are when you look at them, because they are completely random and they're completely not the sort. I'll send you a bunch of them.
Yeah,
because you're just like, okay, it's like patch 2 voltage outputs into the mixer. That's your patch, and you're like, well, what would happen if you did that? If you turned it up a lot, would you hear little thuds when the voltages change?
Yeah, probably.
And then, or it will just come up with these really peculiar patches. And I just found it really interesting. You sit and look at them and go, what if I did do that? What if I had a whole load of stuff and then it just goes into the FM input on the square wave, and the square wave goes to the output? And you would never think to patch in that way. But it gets you into quite weird, interesting
I would definitely
places.
like to try some of those.
Yeah.
The final question, I think, is the semi-normaling thing.
Yes.
I know you've told me about this normalization in the past, but I just want to ask you about it again.
Yeah.
And just sort of on the record, it's like what is involved?
So there are. Do you mean DIY normaling or the normaling that's already there?
Both.
Okay. So the normaling that's already there is the 2 FM controls on the oscillators are cross-modded, which you just kind of
discover.
That's in the instructions, and it's in your kind of first patch, but you kind of discover very quickly. Both the sine waves are patched into the ring mod, which again is kind of explained in the that's my, I think that's described as my 3rd patch in the manual. And then the only other one is in the filters, the top. I know you know this because you did a nice demo of this at Bristronica. The Cascades. Top high pass, band pass goes into the input on the bottom one.
Yeah.
So obviously to do full MS-20, you need to switch the top one to high pass.
And what could you do, and how does it work?
So what you can do is you take the back off, and all of the available kind of points. So that's the inputs on the sockets where there's kind of switched inputs, and the outputs on the sockets are all marked. and you get a little wire and you run it from the output to the input, and it's normalized. So I had mine set up for a while with the 2 square wave outputs going into the 2 filter inputs,
Yeah.
the 2 low pass outputs going into the first 2 mixer channels, the slopes outputs going into the FM. So you turn it on without any patch cables, and
that's kind of what I would want. I would like it's an MS-20, or it's what I want.
And you can definitely do that. I found it really incomprehensible when I was trying to demo it to people, because it becomes really odd, and you unplug something, you get a massive square wave comes out of it. But if that's what you want and you get into it,
I suppose my question is, to what extent does it damage the usability to do that? Does it?
It doesn't. It's normal the way. So it's things like, there are some things to think through. So, like, for example, you might say, I'm going to patch the 2 pulse outputs from computer into slopes. And you're like, yes, you can definitely do that. That does mean whatever is coming out of those is going into slopes.
Whether you like it or not.
And if you loop it, it's then got the pulses coming in, or you'd have to patch dummy cables into those inputs to kill it.
Yeah.
So you might do that for a bit and find it annoying and then unsolder it.
I suppose my point is, like, if you patch into any of those inputs, it will break the normalization.
Yes, exactly.
And what is actually physically involved in the thing, because I haven't got the back of this off and my screws are over there, is like, are they just, I can sort of, I can see them on the end, these ones here.
Yeah, they're literally just marked. So you've got an arrow. I mean, you're going to find it very confusing, because you have an arrow in, which is an input, and an arrow out, which is an output. But that's how they work. You see them on there.
I don't really understand. So I see there's like you're correct. I didn't understand.
So where you've got at the top, you can probably see the audio in one.
Audio in one, and there's a little arrow pointing in.
So the arrow pointing in, if you solder into the top, then that is the switch input. So it will go in there.
What do you mean switch input when you say that word?
So on a socket, the way normalization works. So the way, like in the ring mod, you've got those sine waves into the switch input in the socket, and that's connected until you plug a plug into the socket.
Okay.
So that's how all normalization works.
So basically, if I was to, like, if I'm looking at the very right hand edge and I see audio in one and I see the topmost arrow.
Yeah. If you run a cable from the output, one of those where there's an arrow, a line below it coming out.
Yeah.
And then you would make that connection. So if you went over to the filter low pass will have one of those. You take it from the point with the arrow coming out of it, you connect it to the point with the arrow going into it, and then it's connected up. And if you get it wrong, you can't blow anything up. You just move the wire.
And how would you physically make that connection? What sort of wire would you use?
You'd use any kind of thin hookup wire. If you buy, it's called hookup wire. And it's just simple.
Thin strandy.
I mean, what I would specifically do is I'd go to Bitsbox, which is a sort of small independent electronics retailer in Britain. And I think they'll sell you like a 10-pack of hookup wire.
A pre-cut.
Yeah, like you buy it by the meter or something. And then you'd trim the wire to the rough length and then solder it on.
You like tin the ends, and then you're literally just melting the solder and just wadding it onto the...
Yeah,
there's no kind of anchor point as such, but it's...
No, but it's hold there and it's kind of protected. And if it comes off, you resolder it on again. I mean, it's a very simple little... You could twist a little circle on the end of the wire and kind of loop that around it if you wanted.
Yeah.
And it, I've done it. It works fine. I haven't gone back and done it again because for me it's weird. But it'd be very much like once you get really annoyed of patching things, do it. One frustrating thing that you can't do is you can't do it into the computer inputs for technical reasons, and not on yours, but on the manufactured boards, there are no points marked on the computer input. So you can't, for example, always run the filter outputs through the reverb, which would be something you might consider.
Can you send me a picture of the final? Because I mean, I probably will take the back off and show people, but I don't know.
It basically looks the same. It's just missing a couple of points over there.
Because I was going to say, what is the, well, yeah, okay.
What were you going to say?
Why is there an output for audio in one, if that makes sense? And is that
because that would be if you have plugged anything into audio in one, it will give you that signal.
It gives you a copy of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, you could, I don't know where you'd want to do this, but you could take that and plug it into the switched input on audio in 2. And that's how, when you get mixers where you've got...
The cascade.
They cascade.
I actually kind of wish there was a bit of that going on in here as well. I can't remember what. There was something I was plugging in last night. And I was like, well, it's annoying that I want that to just get copied to the other input.
So that is the kind of thing where... So, for example...
it was the trigger for the slopes. I wanted... if they're both set to blip.
That would be a perfect thing where you could... actually, no, you could only do it with the CV, with the actual input, the pulse input. You couldn't do it from the switches, but you could do it. You could do it so it was the equivalent of like using a stackable on the 2 inputs there.
Yeah, that would be quite good. So triggering one triggers the other.
Yeah, but I think that's also the sort of thing you'd quite quickly find points where you didn't want to do that. Yeah.
But you could just patch in a dummy cable to break it. Okay. Actually, there is another question. Should I play it on its side? How have you kind of...
You definitely can do that. I think the other thing I like is the idea of 2 people playing it.
Yeah.
Get your child to play from one end and you play from the other end. You've both got fully matched sets of stuff.
Yeah.
Also, if you want, I think you could probably use these standoffs to attach a guitar strap and play it like a kind of guitar thing.
There you go. Finally.
I think that would definitely that's probably the critical point to it.
I mean,
and then maybe attach the guitar pedals to the strap, maybe something like that.
Hook up wire to my nipples. And
I mean, actually, we're joking, but that's exactly what Isaac was doing at Brastronica, wasn't he?
Well, he had it. Yeah, he was like walking around with his his breakcore machine. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to say that I haven't asked you about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's, I think it's weird for me at the moment because it is still at the phase of I don't know what people are going to do with it. I don't know what people will be like. This is why this is useful for me.
Yeah.
The conversations I've had have given me clues about what people will do with it. But it's kind of, it is also very explicitly designed to be kind of neutral.
Yeah.
It's like there isn't,
it's open.
There isn't, this is the answer, this is what it's for.
Well, one thing I was going to ask, I thought to ask at the start and I didn't, was there isn't anything. If this is £400, is it the cheapest sort of? What am I trying to say here? Is it the best, cheapest? Is it the best workshop that you can get for £400? Like, I suppose if we compare it
tell you the conversations I've had. I was having a conversation with a retailer, who sat down with him and said, what does this cost if you can buy it, like as a ready-made thing? And earlier in the year, he was like, not less than £500, not more than £600. And then I saw him again a couple of months later after he'd thought about it. He was like, this should be £800. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think if you were to try and make this from Dupfer modules, it would cost an awful lot more than that.
It unquestionably will cost an awful lot more to make it out of anyone's modules.
That's the thing I keep finding.
And it would be
it is fundamentally it is a real modular synth. I think that's the point. It's like that's why I find it difficult to explain sometimes, because there's a lot to it, but also why I find it really exciting in that it was like that thing with the distortion we said at the beginning. You can use the distortion in like 10, 15 different ways. It's not just a box that says distortion that you plug into it. And like the slopes you can use in multiple different ways. You can use them to run, like I found it really, really difficult when I started demoing it. I could do a demo where I had like a Turing machine card in it, and I had 2 square waves, and I had 2 filters, and I had 2 envelopes, and I had pulses coming out. And I was like, that sounds kind of cool, and it sounds better now it's in tune. And I was like, that is good. It sounds really cool. It sounds really nice. But then I would show somebody like a kind of cross-modded kind of FM patch, and they were like, whoa, this is a totally different thing. This is really exciting. And I found it quite hard to predict which person would be excited by which thing. And it's just like, if you were to demo a modular synth to someone, what you do all day long. But that, like, what is this thing? You will have fundamentally very, very different, and like, and also I think the connecting it to other stuff is very real. I've had people say, oh, it's mainly an effects box, isn't it? And I'm like, yes.
If that's what you use,
you could totally use it for just
as a shared filter bank.
Making drums sound interesting all day long.
You could do with an envelope follower, but then you have got
you can patch an envelope follower into slopes if you want.
I was going to say they're slew generators.
You could do that, just about, yeah.
I suppose the reason I asked this is I'm trying to kind of in my mind put it in the landscape of existing synthesizers, and I thought of the Teenage Engineering's Pocket Operator Modular 400.
Yes, that's probably the closest thing in terms of price.
And I don't say this very often, but I actually don't think that's a very, like, I think it's for the price it ended up being sold for, it's insane, because like before it sold out, I see here it's £290. Like, that's nuts.
Yeah.
And it is very capable, but I tried it, and it uses those like Lego shaft things, and they feel diabolical. Like they're scratchy. So the feel and control and just the experience I had when I used it, I was like, this just feels really cheap and kind of scratchy and unpleasant. And it is very, it's basically just a subtractive mono modular synth. It doesn't have like 4 voltages, a computer, it doesn't have the kind of surgy sort of sensibility that is in here, where there's a little, a bit of breadth and flexibility that's been baked into everything. So, and
that's really, really deliberate. That was like you spend money on this knob. Yeah. That knob costs about 2 or 3 times as much as this knob.
Yeah.
And takes up a lot of space. But
feels good.
I wouldn't want just these little knobs. Yeah. The other thing about the DIY-ness of it is, however we end up doing it, if we have to pay somebody to screw on these nuts, that will add like £40-50 to the cost of the thing, because you're hiring somebody with a level of expertise for like half an hour. There's no way around it. So the idea was to make the actual interface as nice as it possibly can be, and then it doesn't even have sides, because that would add cost.
Yeah.
And it has a box that protects it and covers it, but it's like, where can you get away with not spending money, and where do you spend
Yeah,
money?
you put the money in sensible places.
It's the interface.
Like I would say, it's not obvious from this, but it feels really nice. Like it feels good. It's not too small, like in the sense of like the IntelliJoy Cascadia. I remember seeing pictures of it and thinking, oh, that's very small. But actually, when I had it, I'm like, no, it's actually a good size. It's not too small. It feels I can get my hands around everything I need to get my hands around. And there's not really I haven't found an issue ergonomically with this, other than not all the sockets in the center is a thing, but don't
having played with it, do you think that works?
Having all the knobs and the sockets in the center?
Yeah, it means you've got two interfaces to get at the knobs. If they were all along the bottom, you would have a much more dense interface.
It would be different. It wouldn't be worse necessarily. I would it's hard for me to say whether it would be worse or better, and those things are a bit meaningless in the sense that there's so many different ways that you might approach it. You might only be using part of it at any one time, so ergonomically, I'm not even touching the bottom oscillators. It doesn't even matter, and just depends what you patch. When for example, when I got the case, my modular case is from what's his chops from Elevator Sound, Aaron.
I know the guy you mean. Yeah.
The case manufacturer. I feel really bad. I can't think of his name. Anyway, but I was like, I want my 1U in the center.
Yeah.
And he was like, people tend to regret that choice, he said. And I sort of, now that I've done it, I kind of know what he means in the sense that, but that's a full-size thing.
But you never have to patch over it's the river of cables down the middle.
Absolutely.
It keeps out of the way. You never need to cross that river.
It's, the Rubicon. It is tall. It's a tall Rubicon. But then if you got the tendrils, right-angle cables, that would help you. It become
possibly, yeah.
Point is, it is good. I think how it is. It's not there's certainly no great hardship in using this thing, and it's definitely, we don't have any issue with how it's been laid out. Aside from the arrows, the ins and outs arrows, and your the fact that the amplifier section is sort of mistakenly using the in and out language.
Do you have if you look at it now, can you work out which one's the input to the amplifier?
Well,
I mean, can you actually go, if I had to patch into that, which one would you patch to get the signal out?
Yeah. I would go.
Would you patch it into the left?
No, I'd go into the left.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's not a problem. It's not. I'm not going to it's not a mistake. Wait,
no, it is a mistake. It's not a problem.
It is technically different in language to the rest of the synth, but
I'm just wondering if because on yours, I should know the answer. If you look at the filter switches, are the low pass ones kind of splodged underneath the?
Yeah, there is the low pass is slightly hidden under.
Yeah,
the top one.
So the production version, that's fixed. What I don't know off the top of my head is whether he noticed whether Alex, who designed the panel, let me just pull it up, whether he noticed the amplifiers were the wrong way around.
Heads will roll.
No, I think it's
I'll tell you what. It's going to be more valuable. That's going to be like the when you get a banknote with a misprint.
There are so many annoying little misprints. Like on the power supply, on the finished one, on the back, it says Revision 1 South London Edition. Inside it says Prototype 1.2, whatever. It's annoying. No, on the final proper version, it does have the innovative and unusual up arrow, divergent. That's the way it makes it more special.
It does make it more special. Oh, yeah. Very quickly, what is the difference between lo-fi and mic? What does that mean?
So mic is the microphony contact mic input. So it's an op amp.
Yeah.
It's kind of relatively clean as is ever going to be.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you're putting a modular level signal into it, it's going to be massively blown
distorted.
Lo-fi is the mini Moog drive circuit from Mini Drive. So it's transistors. So
is it a mini drive?
Yes, it is exactly
great,
a mini drive. So
that is a great. I should make a note of that. I was just I'm like mini drive with 808 is good.
Again, you're for that, and it's funny how it's less apparent than I expected it to be. I was expecting it to sound completely different.
Right.
In fact, when you're blasting an 808 through it, they both sound pretty blasted through. But you definitely get that really nice. It's more actually, I think, that the op amp one does sound more like a nice distortion than I was kind of expecting it to. Mm. You could consider the op amp one to be the sound of an overdriven Mackie desk, though that's not a very accurate representation of it.
Okay,
that is basically
it's not actually the Mackie circuit.
No, it's not the Mackie circuit. It's the contact mic circuit.
Did you say that you could change the response of the slopes to be different?
Yeah. So the top one, if you look at the panel in detail, you'll see the top one is linear, the bottom one is expo. Yeah. On the back, there are points where you can either cut or solder to close it to make them both, whichever one you want.
Mm. Is there anything else like that?
Yeah, in the filters, there's two different varieties of more extreme.
Oh, yeah. What devil does that mean?
So I haven't studied these a great deal. These are from the humpback design. Because for me, I like the humpback because it's quite clean. The original humpback design was like make it more and more gnarly.
Yeah. And
essentially, there are two varieties of gnarliness that you can add to both of them. So if you close the points, you'll get more and more resonance and more kind of weirdness in the circuit, basically.
Okay. What, weirdness? You don't know, like as in you've not tried it. Yeah.
I tried them back when I was developing it early, and I was like, I'll leave it here because some people might want really hardcore resonance and stuff. But for me, I preferred it with them turned off.
Yeah. What is the difference?
I think
there might be a humpback video, maybe Ben did one, or maybe there's like.
Yeah, definitely one of them is turbo resonance, which does exactly that. It just adds more gain to the resonance circuit, which for me, I didn't think it really needs, but it's there if somebody wants it. The other one is basically it bolts a big capacitor into the main filter circuit that I think just changes the response in some way.
Okay.
I think those are the only ones.
Can you do one and not the other?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
They're totally independent.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if I liked them, I would have done one different one the other way. I preferred it kind of relatively clean.
No, I think they're still pretty vibey. I mean,
exactly. That's what I mean. They're not polite, but they're not like super
MS-20,
extreme.
like tear your head off.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you.
The other, as we're talking about orientations of things, you will have noticed on the pedal send and return, they are send on the right, return on the left, because that's how guitar pedals work. Which I've always found weird on guitar pedals, that you put the signal in on the right. Yeah. So they're done to match that.
Just to like match that language.
Exactly. Because otherwise it's really annoying, the cable's always crossed over.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I see what you mean.
To me, intuitively, you'd send it out on the left and you'd return it on the right, but you don't.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, and the other thing, in terms of experimentation, it's things like, what if you use those send and return to go out to the amplifier or to go out to a filter? Something will happen. Basically, what those send and return, they drop it down to pedal level and then boost it back up.
Yeah. So
you could, do like, you then could have like a blend control on a filter or something, which is kind of weird effect. I don't know what that would sound like.
Yeah, I suppose it's just feedback. You could just do weird feedback.
That would give you extra resonance or something. But that's what I mean. There's loads and loads of things on here that I have never tried. Yeah. Because there are so many of them. I'll send you 1,000 patches from. Yeah, please.
No, genuinely do. And then the other thing, there isn't an envelope follower, is there? Oh, you said use slopes, but
there's not a dedicated one, but you can definitely get that kind of vibe if you patch. For example, if you've got the stereo in and you take one of the outputs and you patch it into slopes, and maybe you do the switch so it's coming down, or in the middle either way, and then you probably have it pretty short, you will get that kind of effect. It's obviously not kind of optimized for that. And you should try the linear and the expo to see which one works
I'm just
best.
thinking of things like the other example was the Sherman filter bank. And it's like, I wonder if there's anything from the design that could inspire some sort of computer module that would make it useful for audio processing.
So somebody who is known to both of us, who has been developing things for the computer module, said to me, "Oh, I've got a really nice pitch follower that I can do on this chip."
That sort of thing.
And so they could do like a 2024 version of the MS-20 input module where it could properly track pitch.
Yeah.
And hopefully track it in a mad way. So if you put drums into it, you'll get interesting stuff out of it.
Kind of like the Sherman filter bank has always interested me. And I've never owned one. And I know there's like basically like triggering and other sort of gating that it can do. Basically feed it audio and it activates and triggers and excites filters in a variety of ways. It feels like an example of a design that's worth investigating just to see if there's anything that can be gleaned from it. And if, there could be a card that would.
Another interesting patch trick quickly is on those slopes, you can use the pulse input and the loop together. So it's quite nice if say you've got the Turing machine, you've got a sequence going, you then flip it into loop and it will reset. Yeah. So it will kind of do a pulse. It's then very distracting if you don't realize it's happening. You're like, what on earth is going on with my pulses? But it's a really nice little effect for kind of adding sort of stuttery, juddery stuff. Yeah. I'm just going to send you your.
Okay. You send me 1,000
random patches.
Right. Finally.
You'll see it's described as valid patches because they are valid.
Okay.
They also have names. So
I like that.
So if let's just randomly scroll somewhere. So number 3039 is dark plane, amplifier out to mixer in 1. So that'd be the contact mic. Amplifier out to VCF2. VCF2 low pass to mixer. VCO square to me. That's a perfectly valid patch. Contact mic through a filter.
Yeah.
That'd be all right.
With a drone added.
With the drone maybe, or clicking, low frequency. Or you might have the output going into your mini rig underneath the device, so it feeds back through the contact mic.
Yeah.
That's quite nice.
That is interesting. Okay. Well, thanks very much. What is the next? Like, Steve was basically. I'm not doing this video for tomorrow.
No, so it's gonna go on sale like next week, I think.
Okay.
And that's the first 200, and hopefully they will sell. And then I guess there'll probably be another 200 in the new year. And I mean, I think we're very much hoping that there's a kind of initial bunch of people buy them because they're into it and they like the idea.
Early adopters.
And then at some point, we need to then get much better at explaiing it, selling it, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he was basically, make a video, but it doesn't have to be immediately, but it, it will.
That's what he said to me yesterday. Yeah.
Because there's just not going to be that many to go around, so it's of. It's better coming when there's more available and people, if they really want one, they can just get one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Great. Well, and I'll see. I need to come down in January, obviously.
Yes, definitely. Great.
So otherwise, keep you posted. And so, by the way, you've sent me an email that has got files. I should basically update. These are like new.
Yes, those are the actual production versions. Okay. And so do you know how to do that?
I think you put the card in, you USB.
Pull off, this is when you do pull off the socket.
Yeah.
The plug, which once you've done a couple of times gets very easy. It's a bit hard the first time. You hold that connected to USB. You hold that down, and then you tap that. Wherever it's gone there.
What? Tap what? Oh, there is a little button there. Yeah.
There's a little button under the socket, and then you tap the kind of reset button by the card.
Yeah.
And then it appears on your desktop as a folder, and then you just drag the file into that folder, and then it disappears and is
because it gets accepted and
yeah. And if it doesn't happen, the first thing to check is, have you got an actual data cable, not a power cable?
Yeah.
The second thing to do is to possibly just cycle the power, because sometimes if it's powered separately, I don't know whether the grounds don't connect up neatly or something. So just flip the power on and off or something if it doesn't. But it seems pretty solid and reliable. So you just do that blip and it comes up and mounts on your desktop.
Okay.
And do check which one's in there before burning.
Yes, you don't make a
but you've got
with the reverb.
Yeah, you've got all of them now. So and you do the same for burning. And you should have some blank ones coming from Funk.
Yeah, wicked.
Cool.
So the final one is you get MIDI, reverb, Turing, and a blank.
Yes.
Okay. Have you got? Do you have just a folder that's got all the latest documentation in it? Because I'm starting to worry that I've got like bits here and there and everywhere, and I just
within a week, it will all be on the website. So I'll ping you when it's all there. I'm gradually. I mean, if you look, in fact, in terms of documentation, the best place at the moment is now the website, which is a quick start guide. It hasn't got that much about computer on it though, but it's got all the other stuff, and it's got like. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. There's obviously a lot more that could be there, but it's all in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. All right.